Saltenberger, the Fire Weather Program Manager at the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center. And we seem to be having a pretty early warm season here in Oregon. So we wanted to get John's perspective on what we can expect from the upcoming fire season. So to start us off, John, could you introduce yourself and what you do for a living?
Okay, so my name is John Saltenberger. My official title is Fire Weather Program Manager. I'm part of the staff of what's called the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center in Portland, which is a fire dispatch center for the federal and state wildland fire management agencies in both Oregon and Washington. I'm trained as a meteorologist, and my specialty within meteorology is fluctuations in fire danger and fire weather across my area of interest. I am employed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the fire management program, Fish and Wildlife, but I work on behalf of the federal agencies that are represented at the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center. My day-to-day job is looking at fluctuations in fire danger and fire weather across Oregon and Washington with an eye toward anticipating potential problems, particularly as it pertains toward outbreaks of large and costly dangerous wildfires in both Oregon and Washington and elsewhere across North America.
Okay, great, thank you. So last September, Oregon experienced massive wildfires when strong eastern winds combined with hot and dry conditions to create enormous fires that burned over 1 million acres, killed 9 people, and forced the evacuation of nearly 40,000 Oregonians. And now Portland is experiencing higher than normal temperatures, and a burn ban is affected in Multnomah County. Several fires have already sprung up throughout Oregon over the last month, and Governor Kate Brown declared a drought emergency in Klamath County. So all of these conditions are leading Oregonians to wonder, what does this wildfire season have in store for us, and what should we be preparing for? Should we be anticipating a repeat of what happened last September?
Okay, so we're going into the beginning of fire season 2021 with vast areas of drought across Oregon and Washington. The national drought designations are vast across the western states and the United States as a whole. In fact, I believe at this point that there is a greater designation or a greater proportion of the United States under drought declaration right now than there has been in the history of drought monitoring. Oregon and Washington are just part of that overall picture. Now, when we focus in on Oregon and Washington in particular, the driest spots are east of the Cascades in the Columbia Basin of Washington, Central Oregon, South Central Oregon, and to a lesser extent in Southwest Oregon. The winter of 2020 to 2021 did bring us some relief in terms of the severity and aerial extent of drought in both Oregon and Washington. But it hasn't been particularly wet across much of the Pacific Northwest. And so we are seeing this dry spell that we're getting early in the season, leading to a greater dryness of flammable fuels across both Oregon and Washington. And therefore, we've seen an early ramp up of fire danger in both Oregon and Washington, in particular in Central Oregon and Central Washington, but also west of the Cascades as well. Now, when I look at early season warm spells, certainly they begin to concern us as we see fuels dry out and we start seeing problem wildfires, what we may call nuisance wildfires, springing up that result in local fire departments, rural fire departments expending time and energy to manage those fires, such as has been happening in Clackamas County, Multnomah County, and elsewhere over the past few weeks. And that's also true in Central Oregon as well. But I also warn folks not to get too worried about what the following fire season will be like, simply based upon warm, dry spell during the spring. It's almost always the case that once we wind up with a warm and dry spell for a week or 10 days in spring, usually later on in the spring, you're going to pay for it somewhere else, a corresponding period of cool and wet weather. And that certainly looks like it's going to be the case shaping up here into the last week of April at this point. We've been in warm and dry weather, but cool and wet weather looks like it's returning to us. That's going to definitely quell the fire danger that ramped up to unusually high levels early in the season.
That seems like some good news.
It is good news for us is that it will take the immediate strain off the local rural fire departments having to deal with burn bans, having to deal with escaped backyard burns, accidents, and other nuisance type fires. Now, at this point, I would say that even with the dryness that we have observed, this traditionally is not a major concern for, say, activation of large fire management teams in Oregon and Washington, that even with dry springs, the incidence of large, costly type fires that require mass evacuations and high expenditure of money to manage those fires is very, very rare before June.
Okay. All right, moving on to a topic that's important to a lot of us with climate change in mind. Should we be expecting larger wildfires and longer wildfire seasons to be the norm in the future?
Yeah, we've certainly seen a gradual ramping up of temperatures across North America and elsewhere on the globe in the last few decades. And at this point, I don't see anything that's going to cause a reversal of that. So when we look at a gradual rise in temperatures, we start to see a greater incidence of fires, particularly large and costly fires, corresponding to that gradual warming. I'm reminded of a study that was recently published by the U.S. Forest Service and the University of Montana, I believe were the cooperators, that clearly showed that across the western United States, mainly west of the Continental Divide, that there has been in some spots up to a 40% decrease in rainy days during fire season over the last 4 decades, roughly since 1980 or so. So in the past, when we had a greater incidence of rainy days during fire season, that was good news for us in that it cooled the weather off, we got some moisture, and it reset fire danger back downwards. And then as it dried out again, fire danger climbed. We're not getting those reset days nearly as frequently as we did in past decades, which means that our fire danger, it starts ramping up and it's just really nothing to hold it back. Because of the incidence of cool, wet weather, it's just dramatically declined in the western states during fire season, and that's an ominous trend for us.
Okay, thank you. If you're just joining us on Facebook Live, my name is Catalina Gaitan. I'm a reporter at the Oregonian, and I'm joined today by John Saltenberger from the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center. So continuing on about wildfires, you've been working in meteorology for over 30 years, so you have a lot of experience identifying weather patterns. With climate change on our minds, are these weather patterns that you've been identifying for decades starting to change or shift at all?
What's worrying to me is that, to phrase it, that I was raised in California, and we were, as a child, up to my high school years and college years, and Northern California, Central California were occasionally subject to strong bouts of easterly winds, similar to Southern California Santa Ana winds. And those could dry things out in a hurry and provide strong winds. And if we got fires during such conditions, particularly in mid and late summer, we had world problems. Those numbers of wind events seem to be increasing, both in Northern and Central California. And then we add on top of that the tremendously strong wind event that we saw in September of 2020 over both Oregon and Washington. Now, I'm not a climate scientist by trade or by training, but I detect like an ominous trend in the number and intensity of these strong easterly wind events that seem to be moving northwards from California into Oregon and Washington and hitting us at times when fire danger is high. I can recall earlier in my career, say back in the 1990s, those strong east wind events typically didn't hit us until we got into late September and October. And now all of a sudden it seems like we're having these strong easterly wind events hit us a little bit earlier in the year when fire danger is still high. I would add to that the Labor Day of 2020 wind event was the strongest I have ever seen that early in the year, especially when the winds are coming from the east like that. I'd seen strong winds like that in the winter with full-on winter storms, but during fire season, that was unprecedented for me. I'd never seen that combination of high fire danger overlaid by a strong wind at the same time.
Wow. Well, what kind of things can we do in Oregon or Oregonians do to lower the risk of either starting a fire or making a wildfire get worse?
Yeah, so the fire agencies, both the Oregon Department of Forestry, the Washington Department of Natural Resources, as well as the federal cooperators, U.S. Forest Service, the BLM, and other cooperators, have all kinds of publications, advisories, and guidelines that folks can follow to help fireproof their home and their property, in terms of cleaning up brush, debris, stacked firewood, uh, things like that. That information is widely available to us. On top of that, I would say that being aware of trends in fire danger is important for us. And by when I say being aware of trends in fire danger, I mean just a little bit more than occasionally looking at what Smokey Bear is telling us, positioned out in front of a ranger district office, and that's a good place to start. But there are a variety of different ways of tracking fire danger day by day, and it involves how dry has it been over the past month, what is today's temperature and humidity, what is the wind doing today, and various combinations thereof. I think it's going to behoove us all in the Pacific Northwest and elsewhere across the West to become more cognizant of the terminology of the science of fire danger rating, because I have a suspicion that we're going to be paying more and more attention to even smaller scale fluctuations in fire danger day by day, as fire managers, as policymakers, as our rule makers are going to be confronted with decisions about whether to do things like restrict recreation in particular areas, or enact burn bans, or close areas of public lands to public access because as fire danger fluctuates. I think we're also going to be faced in the future with things like possibly closure of highways, or evacuations of communities, or possibly further kinds of restrictions, maybe power grid shutdowns as fire danger fluctuates. Certainly, what we've been seeing is this number of years with record high fire danger that don't show any signs of stopping, and so. Being aware of the implications of fire danger is going to become more and more important for all of us.
Okay. Well, it's not all about wildfires. It's not all scary. We have some lighter questions. A lot are coming from local gardeners who are experiencing this warm spell and are wondering if they can get away with planting some of their summer vegetables, especially tomato plants now, even though it's technically not the right time. What do you think?
Yeah, I always warn people to be skeptical about these early teasing warm spells that we get that might cause us to plant early, or drag our patio furniture out of storage early and set it up.
Yeah.
Because almost always my experience has been, as we get a warm and dry spell sometime in April or May, we're going to pay for it somewhere else, with a corresponding cool and wet spell following. And I strongly suspect that's going to be the case for us here as we go into the last week of April, into May, and even into June, in both Oregon and Washington. I mean, how many times have we had weather looking great in May, and then by Rose Festival, just buckets of rain are coming down on us? So
yes.
I always urge skepticism when it comes to these teasing warm, dry spells early in the year.
Bummer. Okay, no tomatoes just yet.
Not just yet. Well, at least put them in the greenhouse. Huh?
All right, sounds good. All right, well, thank you so much, John Saltenberger from the Northwest Interagency Coordination Center. My name is Catalina Gaitan. Thank you for joining us today on Facebook Live. If you want to read more about wildfires and read our coverage, check out OregonLive.com and subscribe to the Oregonian. Thank you so much, John.
Thanks for having me.